And a very good evening to you. My name's Joel Hufford and I'm your host for this evening's webinar on Havant Thicket Reservoir from Portsmouth Water. Welcome along. Hope you enjoyed that opening film there, giving you a glimpse of what the reservoir will look like once it's actually completed in a decade or so's time. You'll meet the rest of the panel that you'll be hearing from this evening very shortly. Just a quick word though on how the webinar is going to work. It'll be myself and the panel that will appear on camera and with sound this evening. Just because of the number of people involved, we can't have everyone on camera and speaking, but there'll be plenty of opportunity for you to ask your questions and have your say as well. I'll explain more about that in just a second. First of all, let's just talk about what we're going to cover off this evening in terms of the key topics to do with the Reservoir Project. And a reminder, all the information that you're going to see this evening, the videos and all the details in terms of maps and that kind of thing is all available on our website. Just Google Havant Thicket Reservoir consultation and it will bring up the information for you there. So in terms of what we'll hear about tonight, we'll talk about the need for the reservoir in the first place, in terms of the regional picture around water resources and helping out the environment across the southeast. We'll also talk about the benefits of the environment locally as well as the benefits there'll be for local people in terms of leisure. And then we've got a couple of important updates in terms of new proposals that are coming forward around the reservoir scheme. How to get to and from the reservoir in terms of access route options. That's had a lot of discussion on our Facebook page at Havant Reservoir on Facebook if you want to find us. And also we'll talk about the reservoir's design and how we're going to build it, including a pipeline to get water to and from the reservoir from Bedhampton Springs and then back out again in terms of them putting it into supply for customers across the Portsmouth Water area. And also as well, plenty of opportunity for you to ask your questions. And if you want to know how to do that, it's right there on the slide in front of you. So at the bottom of your screen, you've got two buttons. Ignore the raise your hand one this evening. It's the one on the right, the Q&A one, which you can see a little bit closer up there that we want you to pay attention to. And if you just click that, you can type in your question. It will pop up in front of me and I can put it to the panel members. We might also type an answer back as well, if that's something that's easier to do. And all the answered questions will appear for everyone to see as well. And they're all recorded as part of our consultation responses too. All the feedback we get from the webinar tonight and also as well through the website and through people who've been posting back feedback forms as well, comments on Facebook, whatever it is, they're all going to shape our planning application to Havant Borough Council and East Hampshire District Council that will go in later this year. And again, all that information will be published then, and you'll have the opportunity to look at it and comment on it further before the councils make a decision on that. The other thing to say is we are recording the webinar this evening, as we have done with the other half dozen or so that we've done already. So if you've got friends, family, colleagues that couldn't make it tonight or to any of the other sessions, again, if you go to our website, portsmouthwater.co.uk/Havant-Thicket-Reservoir, go to the consultation webinar section. All the recordings, including tonight's one, will be on there for you to look through. And perhaps if you want to rewatch a particular section, or just if someone that you know has missed it, you can say, go to that site and you can see it once again. So let's start off this evening with a little poll for you. Just a couple of quick questions. So you should get a little panel that pops up on your screen. A couple of quick questions. One about how much you already know about the Havant Thicket Reservoir project. You've got the multiple choice answers on the screen in front of you there. And also as well about your support for the plans. And again, we're happy to hear from all sides of the equation. So do let us know what you think, whether it's tonight or via the online feedback survey on our website, whatever it may be. So just give people a few more seconds to fill those in. And again, thanks once again for taking the time to join us this evening. Hopefully you'll find it interesting, but your feedback on the webinar and also your views on the project are more than welcome as well. So we'll give a few people a few more seconds to fill in their views. I think everyone who's going to vote has done. So I'll end polling there and share the results with you. And again, you can see it's a little bit of a spread in terms of how much people know about the project already, but most people falling into the a little camp, almost 50%. There's quite a few people who know quite a lot, and then a few people at either end of the equation who know a lot about it already or nothing at all. And in terms of support, it's a bit of a split there. 46% of people who voted say they are supportive. There's a couple of people who aren't. Again, whatever your views, do let us know what you think, and it will get taken into account when we put in the planning application in a few months' time. So let's meet the rest of the panel that you're going to hear from this evening. If everyone can turn on their cameras and their microphones as well. And just a reminder to people, when I introduce you, if you can wave and say hello, and then if someone's watching on a mobile phone, for example, they can only see the person who's speaking, when you make a noise, it means they can see you on screen. So let's start first of all with Portsmouth Water's Chief Executive Officer, Bob Taylor.
Hi everyone, good evening.
We've got Simon Hughes, who is the Havant Thicket Reservoir lead for environment, stakeholder and also planning as well.
Hi everybody.
And then working closely with Simon is Joe Farrer, who's in charge of preparing all the information that will go into the planning application in due course.
Good evening, everyone.
We'll hear about the need from the reservoir very shortly from Jim Barker, who's Head of Water Resources at Portsmouth Water.
Good evening, everyone.
And then the man who knows about every cough and tickle about how the reservoir will be built is Bill Irvine, our lead design engineer.
Hello, good evening.
The environment is a massive focus in terms of the project, so we'll hear from Trevor Codlin, who's Principal Ecologist at Portsmouth Water, on that.
Good evening, everyone.
We'll also talk about leisure and the benefits that the reservoir scheme would deliver, and Jamie Metcalf is the man who can answer your questions about that this evening.
Good evening, everyone.
A lot of debate on Facebook in particular about the access route options in terms of getting to and from the reservoir, both during the construction phase and in the longer term for visitors using the site. And Andy Hills is our expert on that.
Hi, good afternoon.
And then last but far from least, we've got two colleagues helping with the webinar this evening and also the consultation in terms of the communications around it, the publicity, answering people's questions. First of all, we've got Rebecca Burgess.
Good evening, everyone.
And then also Josh Newman as well.
Hello.
There we go. So that's the panel you'll be hearing from throughout this evening. And again, if you've got any questions, do let us know about them. If we don't answer them immediately, it may be because we're holding them back until it's in the relevant section, so to speak. But all the questions we get this evening, we will try and answer tonight. If not, if it's something we can't answer straight away, we will come back to you after the fact as well. So for now, apart from Bob and Simon, we can say goodbye to the panel members and we'll have a chat with Bob and Simon first of all. And Bob, if I can start with you, what's your message tonight? This is the last of the webinars that we're doing because our consultation runs for a few more days on the reservoir scheme. What's your message to people about the scheme and about the consultation?
Thanks, Joe. Well, firstly, I'd like to thank everybody for taking the trouble to join in this webinar this evening and to hopefully learn quite a bit more about the reservoir and our proposals. I mean, my simple message to everybody is that we want to hear from you. We want to hear your views. We want to hear your questions. The whole objective of this consultation exercise is to listen to people who are interested or affected by the reservoir proposals in some way. So please, let's have your feedback. That's really valuable to us. We've spent quite a lot of time already on this project, both recently and 10 years ago when the reservoir was first seriously talked about. And in that time, we've already done a lot of consultation. And I think where we've got to today is largely honed as a result of all of that feedback. But we want to continue the process. We're getting close to the planning application now later in the year. And we really need to hear more about our thoughts and ideas and adjust things accordingly. So please let us know what you think.
Okay, and Simon, if I can turn to you, people may be wondering, we're in the midst of the coronavirus situation. Lockdown has eased somewhat, so life is taking at least a small step back to some kind of normality. People may be wondering, though, a few weeks ago when the consultation began, things were very different. Why is it the consultation went ahead in those circumstances?
Yeah, thanks, Joel, and thanks everyone for joining us this evening. So we're planning to submit a planning application to the local authority in September, and we'd always planned that we would come out to listen to what people in the community had to say long before we finalised those documents, and that would normally be through a series of presentations in a village hall with a cup of warm tea and a soggy biscuit, and those are really good ways of getting to hear what people's views are. Now, clearly, there's no way we could do that in the COVID restrictions. It's just the wrong thing to do, and it wouldn't have been safe. So we racked our brains to find a way to make sure that as many people as possible could get their views across. And what we've designed is not just what you're seeing tonight, but also if people are interested in getting a hard copy of our summary of our plans and writing to us with a proper letter, with their views, and there's a way of people getting that message across to us as well. And what we also felt was that this is such an important project, not just for the local community, but for the region as well. It was really important that we kept the progress up and we've kept the momentum going. So we think that we're able to reach out and hear voices of a wide range of different people through this process, and that's certainly what the feedback we're getting and all of the brilliant ideas we're getting from folk out there suggest to us that this is a good way of listening to what you've got to tell us.
And in terms of next steps, can you just give people an idea? The planning application will go in a couple of months' time. So all the information will be published as it is normally, and people have a chance to see that and make their views known before the council committee members make their decision.
Yep.
But crucially, we're going to take all the feedback that we're getting from the consultation and let people know what it is, and more to the point, how we're going to respond to it.
Yeah, so what we do, Joel, is we take the results of all of the input that we've had from all of you, and all the written responses and all the emails and letters that we've had in. We summarize that in what we're calling the You Said We Did report, which is basically a summary of all of those ideas. And what that will show is where we've been able to adopt an idea, we will demonstrate where we have. And if we've not been able to adopt an idea, then we'll explain why. And all of that then shapes both our planning application and all the documents that go into the local planning authorities in late August, early September. And once they're submitted, then they'll all be on the public record and available for people to scrutinise in detail if they wish.
Okay, thanks to Bob and Simon for now. Let's move into the first video of the evening. So the format will be a series of short videos to give you the key information about the consultation materials and the different topics, followed by a question and answer session with the various topic leads. So get those questions coming in via the Q&A tool at the bottom. We've already had one question about the access route options, which we'll get to in due course. Let's start off though at the beginning and find out from Jim Barker why we need the reservoir in the first place.
So I'm Jim Barker, I'm the Head of Water Resources for Portsmouth Water, and it's my job to make sure that there's enough water available to be treated to allow water to come out of everyone's taps for the next 100 years. Building a reservoir in Havant is one of the key parts of a regional water resources plan to make sure that water is available for the whole of the southeast going forward. Water companies are being asked to take less water from some sources we have available to us today, particularly from rivers, and that's in order to keep the rivers safe and healthy to protect wildlife. Plus, we need to find more water to combat the effects of climate change. We're seeing our weather patterns change, and of course we're seeing a growing population in the southeast. So all of that adds up to the water resources in the southeast being under a bit of pressure, and this reservoir will supply extra water into the system to relieve some of that pressure. In particular, Southern Water, our neighbours in Hampshire, are being asked to take less water from two world-renowned chalk streams, the rivers Test and Itchen. We in Portsmouth Water here, we get most of our water from the ground, from the chalk beneath our feet, and we have a series of underground springs that provide plentiful clean water to us. But as part of the southeast, we want to play our role. So in winter, much of our spring water actually flows out to sea. We don't capture it and we don't treat it for drinking water because people are using less water in the winter. So what we're proposing with this reservoir is actually to capture the water that is lost to the sea from our springs, to put it in the reservoir over the winters, so it's available should we have a long, hot, dry summer and water resources become scarce. It's really also important to say that this isn't just about finding more water. Us as water companies, and particularly as Portsmouth Water, we're doing our bit to be more effective and efficient with the water we have. So our leakage levels, for instance, are currently at their lowest level we've ever had. It's really important that we don't waste water. We're also looking to talk to customers about using water wisely. So in this situation of more people, climate change, less water available, we all need to think, are we using water wisely? And to take simple steps that could possibly help us all use a little bit less. We've talked about the reservoir before. Plans for the reservoir, in fact, were first drawn up in 1964, but it was again in 2008 that we drew up the most recent plans, and at that point we shared those plans with our customers, with you guys, during a public consultation. At that point, the water situation wasn't quite as stressful as it is today, So it didn't go forward at that point, but we're bringing it forward now because the situation is more stressed than it was in 2008, and also the regional understanding of the water situation and our ability to move water around the region has improved, which makes the reservoir a lot more important to more people. So right now there's a shortfall of water across the southeast as a whole, and plans for the reservoir have been included in Portsmouth Water and Southern Water's long-term water resource plans as a way of looking to close some of that shortfall.
Okay there, so Jim Barker setting out the rationale for the reservoir in the first place, and Jim joins us, Head of Water Resources at Portsmouth Water, to talk about things in a bit more detail. Got a couple of questions that are coming in, Jim, that I'll put you in just a second. First of all, people will be wondering, and there was a somewhat flippant comment on the Facebook page, Havant Thicket Reservoir, about, I think the reservoir was mentioned in the Doomsday Book. I think what they're alluding to, as you mentioned in the film, is it's been mentioned as something that's going to happen since the mid-1960s. There's been a number of false dawns. What is different about this particular time in terms of it being baked into not only Portsmouth Water's plans, but Southern Water's plans as well as a key project?
So there's a number of things. There's no one sort of killer thing, but there's a number of things working together. So first off, the population density's increased. We've got more people living in our region and in the Southern Water region. So more people need more water. We've got a situation where back in 2008, Southern Water was suspecting that they wouldn't be allowed to take water from the Test and Itchen in such quantities as they did. But now the Environment Agency have acted and they've actually physically changed licenses for Southern Water. So what was a potential threat is now actually a reality, and Southern Water need to work in an environment where they have less water in those locations. And the third thing is actually the government guidance. So back in 2008, we were planning for a dry weather event, a drought, if you like. There was roughly a 1976 kind of scenario, for those of you old enough like me to remember that. And that's about a drought that comes around about every 80 years. What the government are now asking us to do as water companies across the whole country is to plan for an event, a drought that might come around one in 200 years. So the government want us all to be more robust as water companies to ensure supplies are more guaranteed. So those kind of three things acting together mean now's the time we need the reservoir.
Okay, got a question that's coming from Julie, who says, who will own the reservoir? Is it a joint venture between Southern Water and Portsmouth Water?
It is a joint venture, but Portsmouth Water will own the reservoir. Portsmouth Water own the land. We have something called a bulk supply agreement, or we're working through a bulk supply agreement with Southern Water, which means we sell them the water effectively.
And in terms of how unique that is that something that's common across UK water sector, in terms of Portsmouth Water building and owning and operating something that's actually for another water company's benefit?
Yeah, the exact arrangements are quite unique, actually, indeed. But actually, there's quite a few water companies who share resources. There's quite a few reservoirs that feed more than one company, and bulk supply agreements are in place all around the country. So that part isn't so unique. But the fact that we would own the whole asset and be selling the water to Southern Water is a bit special for us.
Okay, and another question that's come in from Philippa, and it might be one that we can pick up with Trevor and with Simon when we get onto the environmental aspects of the scheme in a bit more detail. Philippa says, how will reducing the freshwater flow into Portsmouth Harbour affect wildlife? So she's talking about the water that would normally flow out to sea in the winter being pumped into the reservoir instead. Yeah,
so not massively is the answer to that. So effectively, we're taking water in the winter. So the key is when the springs are running full bore after winter rain, there's a lot of water goes out to sea. We're taking a percentage of that water, not all of it. The Environment Agency will regulate the water we're allowed to take from those springs, and we'll look really closely at the impact we're having. So we'll only be able to take some of that water. So no, it shouldn't affect anything in the harbour, and it's water we can use to offset an impact that Southern Water would be having on the chalk streams.
Okay, and Philip has also made a point to me about the Havant Thicket Reservoir Facebook page. So its name or its handle is @Havant Reservoir, but slightly confusingly, the title is Portsmouth Water Reservoir page. So if you type in either of those, it should bring it up, and you can find all the videos on there. You can have your say and make your comments as well, and see what other people are saying. Thanks to Jim Barker for now. Plenty more questions, no doubt, to come for him. Do get the questions coming in via the Q&A tool at the bottom of your page. Let's move on now to focus on the design and construction of the reservoir, and our lead engineer is Bill Irvine.
My name's Bill Irvine. I'm lead design engineer on the Havant Thicket project. My role on the project is to coordinate all of the design elements across the project, including the reservoir itself, the pipeline, the pumping station, and downstream treatment works and connections into the network, providing water across the Southern Waters region. The proposed site for the reservoir has been owned by Portsmouth Water since 1965 and covers 160 hectares. It sits next to Rowlands Castle and Lee Park and is bordered to the north by Forestry England woodland at Havant Thicket, and Staunton Country Park lies to the south, which is owned by Hampshire County Council. The area is currently grassland and open space with areas of trees. The site has been chosen as perfect place for a reservoir because it sits in a valley on clay soils, which provides a natural seal for water. This means we'll be able to dig and shape the reservoir, predominantly using the existing material on the site. The reservoir would fill the majority of the site and will be up to 18 metres deep in places, and it will be about 1 mile long from east to west and half a mile wide from north to south. The water will be contained by a sloping embankment, which will run along 3 sides of the reservoir and up to 20 metres high in places, with a new wetland habitat area created along its northern edge. The embankment will be mainly constructed from clay, soils excavated on site, but we will need to bring some material to site for drainage and for the internal lining. The embankment will have a grass covering on the outer slope and a rocky surface lining the embankment at the water's edge, protecting the structure from waves. We've looked at the position and design of the embankment and made a number of alterations to avoid the hedges near the western boundary of the site, and slight realignments to reduce the number of trees that will need to be taken out at Roundwood and the Avenue, both of which are ancient woodland. This includes increasing the space between the western boundary and the embankment, making the southwestern edge slightly straighter and shortening the eastern bank. We've also looked at making slopes slightly steeper in places to reduce the land required to build the embankment and minimise tree loss. We will need to build a control house on the southwestern section of the embankment and a new access road as well, and the options for these routes will be discussed separately by my colleague Andy Hills. When full, the reservoir will be able to hold about 8.7 billion litres of water. That's enough to supply 160,000 people during an average year. It will take 9 years to plan, build and fill the reservoir. Everything is scheduled to be complete and the reservoir full of water and open to the public by 2029. We're aiming to have achieved planning permission to enable us to start on site with enabling works through to 2023, creating the access road, preparing the site and diverting footpaths. From 2023, we can then commence construction of the embankment and reservoir itself, digging out the clay and building the reservoir. We'll also be laying the pipeline to transfer water from the pumping station at Bedhampton up to the reservoir itself. From 2027, we can start to construct the amenity provisions on site, including new pathways, a visitor centre and facilities. All works should be finished by 2029.
So we heard from Bill Irvine, lead design engineer for the Reservoir Project in that video. Let's hear from him now. Bill joins us. We've got a question that's come in from Rob Needham, Bill, who talks about, will the nearby houses be safe from any overtopping of the bunds, any flooding that might occur? What safe system will be employed to prevent that?
Yeah, thanks for the question there, Rob. So we have to be very careful when we design the reservoir and think about the risk of flooding very carefully, and that's governed by by a couple of things. So first of all, everything's overseen in terms of our design by what's called the Reservoirs Act. So that sets out the sort of governance and controls and inspection and challenge that we have to make sure is in place, and then we also have to satisfy the Environment Agency as well. So they have a role in sort of reviewing our proposals, our design as well. So there's quite a bit of scrutiny over our designs, and then ultimately the operation and maintenance of the reservoir as well. But in terms of flood risk, there's a couple of points to note, I suppose. So the reservoir itself, the majority of the water that it's storing is actually pumped up from Bedhampton pumping station down at the springs. So we're very much in control of the vast majority of the waters that are actually passed up to the reservoir itself. Now there are local catchment, so part of the Havant Thicket woodland, and obviously the reservoir itself will catch rainwater, but they're quite small sort of volumes. In terms of sort of maintaining sort of safety and risk of overtopping, so we look at the sort of worst case storms and rainfall events that might happen, and it's quite an extreme event that we look at, investigate that into. So something like 1 in 1,000 year or very, very low probability event that might occur, and then we put in safety measures to deal with those extreme events as well. So we have an overflow. We will have an overflow arrangement. So there'll be a sort of overflow facility that will safely convey any of those waters down into the receiving watercourses, the Riders Lane stream. So all of that is really closely investigated, and all of that data is submitted through to the Environment Agency for their scrutiny.
Okay, thanks to Bill. Do keep the questions coming in via the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen. Got a couple of environmental ones that we'll get to in the section with Trevor Codlin in just a second. Got another question though for you, Bill, before we head off into the environmental side of the project from Philippa. She says, what will the view of the reservoir be from neighbouring houses? Because you talked about the embankment and its height. Obviously there's a natural bowl, which is part of the reason why the site's been selected. So is that something you've looked at in terms of the view from local homes?
Yes, we have. Thanks for the question, Philippa. I think it probably depends where you live as to what the view might be. So the ground does it undulates. So I think in terms of the embankment that's going to be constructed, at its highest point is probably towards the southwest of the site. So I think if you're up towards I guess the sort of northernmost part of Lee Park, then of Warren Park, then you'll be able to see the embankment from that part. But from elsewhere, other directions, a bit less so. Now, I suppose the other thing to sort of bear in mind is it's sat back into the Havant Thicket site. So we're looking quite carefully at each of those viewpoints. We have to bear in mind as well that it's sort of sat neighbouring Staunton Country Park as well, so we have to make sure that it blends in and fits appropriately within that historic setting. So yeah, so we're thinking very carefully about the impact on the landscape and views, making sure that the slope of the embankment is gentle, so that it fits in with the surrounding landscape.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions that are coming in about the pipeline that's needed to connect the reservoir from Bedhampton Springs up to the site and then take the water back down again. We'll get to those in due course because Bill will be back to talk about those in just a second. Also going to talk about some of the environmental aspects of the scheme as well. Let's start off with the first part of our videos on that from Trevor Codlin, who's Principal Ecologist at Portsmouth Water.
And my name is Trevor Codlin, leading on biodiversity side of the project. We have always maintained that this is an environmentally led project, and although the habitats on site will change quite dramatically, we are committed to delivering something really special to replace what is already there. We have been surveying the site since 2005, so we have a good understanding of the ecology of the site. We've recorded 13 species of bat, we've got reptiles on the site, breeding birds, and also dormice. And our mitigation and compensation strategy involves doing some quite significant enhancements to the Forestry England site to the north, which is Havant Thicket, and also doing some enhancements to the south in areas of land that we own. One of the key things that we want to deliver, and this is a really exciting bit of the project for me, is the delivery of a new wetland. The plan is to have an area of wetland along the northern edge of the reservoir. So this will be approximately 1 kilometre long. What we're going to have is a retaining bund which will separate the sort of main water body from this wetland, and then we're going to create 4 different wetland compartments which will provide a different range of habitats for different species. There are 4 areas of woodland on the site. We've looked at various options as to how we might save those areas of woodland, because through the consultation process with our partners, which include Forestry England, Natural England, Environment Agency, and the Hampshire Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust, we talked about whether or not it'd be possible to provide 3 or 2 smaller reservoirs rather than 1 large water body, and try and save the avenue. But unfortunately, there are 2 reasons why that can't happen. One is the best clay is located underneath the avenue, and the second is that if you did that, you then end up in a situation where you don't have enough water to address the needs for the future, for water supply for the future. The site is going to change, as we said, so what we're looking at doing is doing some extensive work to improve the quality of the woodlands in Havant Thicket to the north, and then we've also set up a grant scheme, and that capital grant scheme will provide some funding for conservation projects. So we're looking at identifying suitable sites where we would fund the planting of trees in those areas.
So we've got quite a few questions coming in about the environmental aspects of the reservoir scheme. So we'll get to those in just a second. Just a reminder, all the stuff that you're seeing tonight, all the information that you're hearing about is available on our website, portsmouthwater.co.uk/Havant-Thicket-Reservoir, and you can find the videos there. There's the online feedback survey. We've had dozens of people filling that in, so do take the time to do that as well. And also as well, when we get to talk about the access route options for the reservoir scheme and the pipeline route that Bill will come back and talk about in a little while, we've got interactive maps. So if you imagine a Google map, you can zoom in on down to property level, you can see the route there, and you can even stick a virtual pin in that map and make your comments on that as well. And when we talk about the leisure side of things, we've had an ideas board. We've got some really creative ideas for stuff that could happen at the proposed visitor centre for the site and other activities on site as well. And a reminder, if you've got friends or family or colleagues who couldn't join us tonight or haven't been able to join us for the other webinars, we've recorded them all, and again, they're all available via the website. Now, let's hear from Liz Brown, our colleague who's been working with Trevor on the environmental side of the project in particular, and she's been looking at an assessment, including things like visual impact and other stuff as well, about the project and making sure that it's done in the right way.
Hello, I'm Liz Brown. I'm the Havant Thicket Reservoir Project's Environmental Assessment and Design Lead. Havant Thicket Reservoir is going to create a valuable new wetland, woodland, parkland habitats, a visitor centre with parking facilities and a network of trails and paths. We have to take into consideration the impacts of any construction on the surrounding environment. So what we've been doing is we've been carrying out an environmental impact assessment for the scheme. This assessment identifies the environmental effects of the project and develops mitigation to avoid, reduce or offset these environmental effects. The assessment approach, our methodologies, have all been discussed and agreed with the local authority, East Hampshire District Council and Havant Borough Council. The environmental assessment includes inputs from a number of environmental topics. These include air quality, biodiversity, historic environment, landscape and changes in view, noise and vibration, population and health, transport and water, and that's in relation to water quality, water resources and flood risk. We've undertaken a number of surveys and studies. Most importantly, Portsmouth Water anticipated that a lot of survey work in terms of biodiversity would need to be done. But this means that surveys have been undertaken recently and reported on in terms of European protected species, but other habitats as well. In addition, we've done a ground investigation, which is informing the assessments about ground conditions and the amount of material that might be generated on site, which can be used during construction. And we've also been doing traffic surveys to ascertain traffic numbers in the local areas to inform our assessment. The advantage of having this baseline information means that we have up-to-date current information, and then we can then consider the changes that might happen as a result of the project. As our design develops further, we will be developing a detailed environmental plan for construction. Now, this is for both the pipeline and the main reservoir itself. We prepare an outline of this as part of the planning application. This will indicate how we will keep any impacts, such as noise from traffic or construction activities, to a minimum as we are working. This plan will be agreed in advance with the relevant local authorities, and the measures it includes will be applied throughout the construction. For example, a traffic management plan will help reduce disruptions, such as restricting construction traffic to certain routes and times of the day.
So Liz Brown there, our colleague who's been working on the environmental impact assessment for the Reservoir Project. If you want to know more details, it's available on our website. Just Google Havant Thicket Reservoir consultation. Go to the looking after the environment page and there's more details there. And when the planning application goes in, all the detail that's in that environmental impact assessment will be published. And again, you'll have a chance to look at it and comment on it. So let's hear from Trevor Codlin, Principal Ecologist at Portsmouth Water, and also Simon Hughes, who's Head of Planning, Stakeholder Engagement and Environments for the project as well. Trevor, if I can start with you, Carol's put in a question. So she says, I like the grasslands and the associated wildlife, skylarks, lapwings, reptiles such as grass snakes I've seen on my regular walks there. The feeling of space and the green expanse is important to me. There are oaks and other trees surrounding the area, which I understand will be destroyed. These shelter huge numbers of species. At present, the deer can move across the site and safely graze. What about these precious habitats? Why should they be sacrificed in favour of water birds, which have many sites to go to in the area? So I guess Carol's talking about the new wetland that the reservoir will include to attract wildlife.
Yes, thank you, Carol. Yeah, I mean, the site, I've been working on the site since 2005, and I've sort of really quite affectionate about the site. It's a lovely place to go, but you know, I think the important thing here is to remember the need for the water, and obviously in the southeast region we are particularly water stressed. Portsmouth Water have gone through quite an in-depth study, so we've looked at over 70 different sites as to where this reservoir might actually go. We then settled on 5 sites where there was a water source near to the site where the reservoir might be built, and then we sort of looked at all the different options for the reservoir, trying to protect as much of the habitats on site. Obviously, if we weren't in this situation, we wouldn't need to develop the site. So the whole point of the wetland is, because the habitat's going to change from largely open grassland and woodland, we could just put a large body of water, but Portsmouth Water are committed to try and make something special out of the new habitat. And so the wetland gives us that opportunity to provide a whole range of habitats for, primarily wetland bird species, but in actual fact, the northern wetland will have 4 different compartments. One of those will be wet grassland, which we're hoping will be something along the lines of what you've got at Farlington Marshes. So ideally for sort of species like breeding lapwing and redshank. Then we're going to have a reed bed sort of area for sort of coastal birds like, reed warblers, sedge warblers. And then one of the pieces of woodland extends into that wetland. We're going to create a wet woodland habitat in that compartment. And then 2 more compartments will have sort of your traditional wetland with islands for nesting birds and a whole range of different habitats there. So we're then also looking at other off-site works. So we're going to do some management work in Havant Thicket to try and improve that, certainly improve that for the reptiles, bats and dormice, and improve the sort of amount of nectaring species. And then we're currently talking to other landowners with an aspiration to deliver, well, the figure we're talking about at the moment is between sort of 50 and 70 hectares of woodland. So creating new woodland habitats on other sites.
And in terms of the environmental plan, that's something that's going to be finalised to be part of the planning application, and people can see the finalised detail of that. Can you tell us about what type of organisations are inputting into that, or is it something that Portsmouth Water has developed in isolation?
No, we're working with a whole range of stakeholders. So to start with, we've got the statutory consultation. So we've been working very closely with Natural England, the Environment Agency. We're actually sort of having some discussions with the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust. Because they've got some particular schemes going on and might be able to have some land that we can work with. We've had for the wetland design, we've had a stakeholder group that's involved the Wildlife Trust, that's involved RSPB, again Natural England, Hampshire Ornithological Society. So a whole range of different stakeholders have been involved in inputting into this.
Okay, we've got a question in from Rob Needham, who I know you've had discussions about before, about the wildlife side of things in particular. Rob asked 2 questions. What's the timescale for removing and relocating reptiles like adders from the site? Has a suitable alternative been found? And will or has it been surveyed for greater crested newts?
Yeah, I'll switch those 2 around. So hello, Rob, I hope you're doing okay. And so basically great crested newts, we carried out surveys first in 2005. We then repeated those surveys in, I think it was 2006. And then new technologies came along, which they do this thing called eDNA. So you can actually check pools for the DNA of newts. A great crested newt was found in one of the Forestry Commission ponds in 2009. Just a single individual, and since then eDNA has shown the presence of great crested newt in 3 ponds, but we've never found any eggs, we've never found any evidence of breeding. So what we suspect is it's just a lone sort of animal that's just wandering around looking for a mate. It's sort of become isolated from sort of by the roads or that sort of thing. In terms of the clearance of the habitats, we're currently working up our mitigation strategy in partnership with Natural England and other stakeholders, and we're looking at a phased removal of the habitats over probably about sort of 18 months to 2 years. So it'll be a sort of a gradual thing where we try to sort of do things in phases. And then as I say, we're looking at enhancing habitats to the north and south, so that certainly for the reptile species, if you go into Havant Thicket at the moment, large percentage of it is really dense, like birch, secondary birch woodland regenerating. We've done like reptile and bat surveys in those dense bits of woodland, and we're recording no bats other than species like noctule that fly high over the woodlands, and certainly no reptiles within those areas. So by creating sort of clearings within the woodlands and sort of extending sort of ride areas, then there's going to be a lot more space for adders and grass snakes and all the other reptile species.
Okay, thank you. And Simon, question for you that's coming from Naomi. She asks about what sources of renewable energy will be used to meet the reservoir's energy demands. Can energy actually be generated on site for this purpose?
Hi, Naomi. Yeah, great question. And yes is the short answer. The long answer is, pumping water is quite energy intensive, as I'm sure you know. And so we're really keen to make sure that we've got as much renewable energy as we can to offset those both environmental and financial costs. So at the moment, we're looking at options for photovoltaic cells, both on the roof of or around the visitor centre, and also there are some really efficient floating cell arrays that you can get now that you can contain in sort of quite small areas, but they capture energy from both sides, so both the top and the bottom side. So we're looking at that kind of technology where we can use that in discrete, isolated parts of the reservoir to generate as much of our own energy as we possibly can.
Okay, and I've got another question for you, Simon, and a couple more for Trevor. This one's coming from Adam Merwood. As part of the local community and a stakeholder of the reservoir, how can I get involved in the project throughout the planning, delivery, and operation once the project's delivered?
Great to have you aboard, Adam, and you're really welcome. So we will keep the website going, the Portsmouth Water website. We'll keep the Facebook page going. And we'll continue to make information available on those. We fully expect that we'll be working with a lot of volunteers on the site once it's up and running, not just to carry out some of the environmental activities that we'll need to do on site, but also to get involved in some of the site husbandry, working with groups and kids and young people to help them learn about the environment and about water. So loads and loads of opportunities. Keep engaged with us through the website and through the Facebook page, and we'll be posting all the opportunities up on there. We'll be doing work on site, working parties, tree planting, all sorts of things going on. So yeah, we'll really look forward to the time when we can meet up on site and plant a couple of trees perhaps.
And I guess also as well, a big part of the project in terms of its procurement, getting people in to build the thing and then run it in due course. There's a big focus on actually employment opportunities, training opportunities, a benefit for the scheme locally for people out in that aspect.
Yeah, so what's really important for Portsmouth Water as a city-based company, and one of the last two in the country, and a company that's been so interwoven with the local community in Portsmouth and Rowlands Castle and Lee Park and Moran Park and the surrounding area, is that we're about the community and we're of the community. And so one of the key requirements of us building this reservoir is that we create as many jobs and opportunities for learning for local people as we humanly possibly can. So when we come to let the contract for the main works, the contractor will be required to source a majority of their employees from local folk, to use local suppliers, to use local businesses to support the work. So we really want to make sure that as much of the investment we're making in this project is made in the local area.
Okay, a couple of final questions to Trevor before we move off the environmental aspect. We've got leisure to cover off. We've also as well got the access route options to get to and from the reservoir, and we've got the pipeline route to discuss as well. Plenty of time to get your questions in. And Rob's back, Trevor, with another question. Will the deer population move into the Forestry Commission forest and increase grazing pressure in that location? Will the Forestry Commission be culling any deer to take account of this?
Well, the Forestry Commission do already cull deer, so that's just part of their remit. They do actively control deer on their sites, but that's, we're not encouraging that. As far as we're concerned, we're sort of trying to encourage different species, and we will manage the habitats accordingly to accommodate the different species. In terms of deer, they can have quite a detrimental effect where we've done some work. For example, if you do coppicing work and you don't cover your stalls up, then they can sort of nibble the new growth, and that can have quite a detrimental effect on its regrowth. So we were looking at sort of doing sort of measures to try and ensure that doesn't happen, so that where we're looking at doing some enhancements, then obviously they would be protected from the grazing pressure. And of course the deer won't just move into Havant Thicket, they will sort of disperse across the wider landscape, and actually to the north of the site there's an awful lot of, well, in fact to the south as well with Staunton Country Park, there is a lot of sort of woodland linked to the site itself. So I don't foresee sort of a massive increase in grazing pressure.
Okay, and then last question to you, Trevor, in this section from John Barker, who asks, how would the proposed project benefit local catchments, including the Ems? Will the reservoir enable reductions or the cessation of pumping water from the local aquifers, such as Walderton, and the accompanying impacts on lowered river flows in these catchments during the summer? Or could there even be certain negative impacts on these catchments that might need mitigation? So the overall water environment, how will the reservoir impact that more broadly?
Well, all of the water for the reservoir will be coming from Portsmouth water, well, from the sort of Bedhampton and Havant Springs catchments, so it's from our own aquifers. I don't know much about the sort of Ems and how it's linked to the wider catchment, but I don't, because we'll be pumping that water back up during the winter months when there's surplus water, it's not going to affect the flow rates or anything like that at all. And certainly sort of inputs further down, we have to maintain a minimal residual flow into the harbours, and that is set by the Environment Agency. So the flow rates will continue, and although the reservoir will have an impact on sort of the existing catchments that flow across the site, we have to maintain that flow sort of downstream. So anything downstream of the reservoir will the current proposal will be to mirror existing flow rates.
Okay, great. Thanks to Trevor and to Simon for now. And again, if you've got any further questions on the environmental side of things, do hit that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and get the questions in. We will get to them as quickly as we can, and we'll have a wrap up of any questions we haven't covered off before we leave you this evening. So let's focus on the next big topic, which is leisure on the reservoir site. And here's an overview of that from our colleague, Jamie Metcalf.
I'm Jamie Metcalf, and I'm the Havant Thicket landscape architect. I am tasked with designing the external spaces at Havant Thicket in order to create somewhere special for everyone to use. For the local people, Havant Thicket Reservoir will create an exciting new leisure facility and wildlife conservation area for local communities on their doorstep. We want to provide a place for people of all ages to stay healthy, learn more about water and nature, and to get together as a community. We also want to support local wildlife to thrive. So we've worked closely with the local community to understand people's views and develop proposals that reflect these. We're also working closely with our neighbours at Staunton Country Park and Forestry England's Havant Thicket site to make sure our plans work together and support each other. This is our overall plan, which is shaping our proposals. It includes a new wetland habitat on the reservoir's northern edge that's discussed in detail in our video on the reservoir and the environment. Our plan also includes a visitor centre with cafe, shop, community and education spaces, parking facilities, play and picnic areas, and a network of trails for walkers, cyclists and horse riders. So on the site, the visitor centre will be set in the landscaped area, with parking, play areas and picnic sites connecting visitors with the wetland and the surrounding woodland. A wetland boardwalk will run from outside the visitor centre to the nearby bird hide. This will be amongst reeds next to the water, which will encourage visitors to get closer to wildlife on the site and learn more about it. A network of nature trails will lead from the centre for walkers, joggers, cyclists and horse riders. The plan is to replace the existing bridleway with a 5-kilometre circuit around the site with access points for people living nearby. A shorter 1-kilometre trail through the woodland will provide an alternative for visitors who want to stay closer to the cafe and car park. Benches, bins, viewing areas and information boards will also be located all around the reservoir. We've been working closely with local councils, environmental groups and other companies who manage similar sites to explore ways to create a great place for visitors, as well as a peaceful home for the wildlife. We've also been talking to local communities, walking groups and cycling and horse riding representatives to understand all your needs. We plan to provide parking for just under 200 cars in the northwest corner next to the visitor centre. There will also be an extra 75 spaces in an overflow car park with occasional use. We want the car park to have a natural feel with native trees and shrubs and paths leading to the woodland. This will also make it easier for wildlife to travel through the car park area. The car parking will also include spaces for staff, disabled visitors and coaches, as well as cycle racks, and near the time we'll look at how many electric charging points we'll need. The overall parking space numbers are based on the amount of people we expect to drive to the site. They were worked out in a review carried out last year by a company which specialises in public attractions. Based on the medium level of activities we plan to offer. If we offered more activities, we would need to plan for more visitors to the site. There will be charges for car parking, and these will be set in consultation with Hampshire County Council to make sure they align with charges at other nearby sites such as Staunton Country Park and the Forestry England's Havant Thicket Woodland, so that car parks can support each other. We'll be encouraging as many visitors as possible to leave their cars at home and walk and cycle to the reservoir, as well as make use of local transport like buses and trains. We want to work with local authorities and travel companies to integrate the reservoir into the local public transport network.
So we've got quite a few questions coming in around leisure via the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screens. Do hit the button and type it in. We'll get to those in just a second with Jamie, and Simon Hughes is back to answer your queries on that. Just a reminder, all the feedback that we get from the consultation webinars is being taken into account as we shape our planning application to Havant Borough Council and East Hampshire District Council that will go in later this year. But do take the time to fill in our online feedback form as well, our feedback survey. So when the webinar finishes tonight, you'll be automatically directed to take that survey. If you feel comfortable to take it, then please do fill it in, or you can go to the website portsmouthwater.co.uk/Havant-Thicket-Reservoir, and you can look through the material, have a bit more of a consider, and then fill out the feedback form. But do make sure to do it and encourage your friends and family to do the same as well. So you got a glimpse of it in that little video there, the visitor centre and its draft design as it is at the moment. Let's look at that in a bit more detail with the lead architect for that particular building, who's Kieran Dyer.
I'm Kieran Dyer. I'm the architectural lead for the Havant Thicket Reservoir project, and my main remit is to look after the buildings that are part of the reservoir development, mainly the visitor centre and the public realm. The visitor centre is such an exciting part of the overall scheme. Really, it's going to be the public face, the touch points that the public are going to come and see about the reservoir and the development. It has to blend into the natural landscape of the reservoir and the wetlands. We're looking to maintain that rural character, particularly for the use of sort of natural materials to connect people with water. So we're looking at a waterfront location for the visitor centre to really provide that experience and connection for visitors. So the visitor centre is going to have several facilities, the key one being the reception area, where visitors will be able to get information about the water, wildlife and activities that's happening around the whole reservoir. There will also be a large open plan cafe which will have panoramic windows which will give you views across to the wetlands and the different habitats. There's going to be an external terrace as well, which will be just off the cafe. That will have some overflow for another 50 people. There's also going to be a small little shop which will sell local products and artwork. There's also going to be an education and community space. You know, it's going to be a nice flexible area with a separate outdoor space, cloakroom and toilets as well. And really we need to provide sufficient space for staff and volunteers, so there's going to be an office and break room for them as well. The visitor centre has to be designed for a broad range of people. We're looking at accessible users, dog walkers, cyclists, runners, family groups and community groups. So really the visitor centre has to suit all their needs, and that's our challenge. We'll work up the plans to the outline planning permission. Following that, we will work with local stakeholders and community groups to develop the designs further into something more detailed.
So So an overview there from Jamie and from Kieran on the leisure offering potentially at the reservoir sites. Jamie Metcalf, who you heard from in the video before, the one that you've just seen, is with us, as is Simon Hughes once again. Simon, a couple of questions to you on the leisure side of things. One from Jamie, and I've had a similar one in from Adam as well. Will any form of boating, water sport be permitted on the reservoir, kayaking, for example?
Hi, Jamie and Adam. Thanks for your question. Yeah, so we've thought long and hard about this, and there's a couple of reasons why we think at this stage we're not promoting the sort of on-water boating type of activities. So the starting point is that this reservoir's got to work really hard, both as a water resource and as an environmental asset, a jewel in the crown of the south coast. For it to be really successful at both of those things, we need to make sure that the disturbance on the water is minimized as far as it possibly can. So, for example, rare birds are able to nest on the islands without being disturbed, and so on. Also, we'll be whilst it's an operating reservoir, we'll be moving the water, circulating the water from time to time, aerating it and operating it at almost no notice or very little notice. And so in order to ensure people's safety, we felt at this stage it's probably best not to encourage boating. The other issue is, of course, that we want to try and make sure that the right number of people come onto the site so that it's not overcrowded. And if we create the facilities for boating and other users, then we felt we might be bringing in more visitors and increasing the number of cars that are accessing the site and so on. And we tested all these ideas with our stakeholder review panel, our stakeholder forum, and they've helped us come to the conclusion that actually the suggestion that we've got at the moment with no boating, no swimming is probably the right one at this stage. We'll keep it under review though.
Okay, thanks, Simon. Jamie, got a question for you from Adam. If you charge for parking, how will you protect the local residential areas from additional visitor cars parking on roads if it's a busy day, for example?
Yeah, sure. So we're currently in talks with all the local car parks, so Staunton Country Park, Forestry England Car Park as well. We're trying to align all these charges where possible so that they can all function together. We're also in talks with the local authority as well about all these issues that may affect the local residents as well. So we're going to try and tackle these all.
Okay, and I guess the message from the project is there's going to be a lot of communication, a lot of dialogue going on with communities to keep them posted on what's going on. If they've got any concerns, they can raise them and get answers to them as well. So do keep the feedback coming in. Simon, got a couple of questions to you. One from Rob, who talks about vandalism in Staunton Country Park, and he's concerned about that affecting the reservoir site, perhaps pollution as well. He asked about security, and again, a similar question from Carol. She says that fly tipping is currently a bad problem in and around Havant Thicket. Do you think this will be better or worse with the reservoir development? So you talk about those aspects at all?
Yes, happy to. Hi, Rob. Hi, Carol. Good questions. And yeah, I've seen and experienced some of the issues that you're asking questions about. So I think probably a few things to cover in the answer to this one. The first is that the site will be, there will be staff on the site during sort of normal hours that you would expect a country park to have staff there. So probably fewer hours in the winter, more hours in the summer. And, you know, there will always be someone on the site when there's likely to be most normal visitors on the site. The roads into the site and the access routes for vehicles will have to be closely controlled. And so there'll be some form of barrier that will make sure that people can't drive their vehicles onto the site out of hours, as it were. And I know that that's one of the sources of fly tipping is sort of itinerant vans getting into lay-bys and what have you, dropping waste. I think, you know, in terms of the wider access, we're always going to make sure that public rights of way are always open. But also the parts of the site that really people need to be kept out of. So the operational sites, the control room, areas of the embankment that might be a bit steeper that need to be protected, they will have barriers around them to prevent access to them. So, you know, a broad package of measures to make sure that people can enjoy the site and they can do it safely. And also then probably, you know, quite a lot of remote monitoring of, you know, what's going on our site. So we'll always have some form of idea of who's on the site, what are they doing, and measures to respond if people need either help or to be encouraged to stop doing something they shouldn't be.
Speaking of which, Jamie's got in touch with a question, and he raises the issue that has been raised with us before, not least of all by local councillors, about off-road motorbikes and quad bikes riding on the thicket sites. Again, is that something you've largely covered off with the answer already? Or do you want to add anything about that?
I probably haven't dealt with that in detail. Absolutely, we understand your question, Jamie, and we've been talking to the police about what's going on the site, you know, as we speak, and has been over the last few months. What we're looking at is a range of different types of barrier to help prevent people from getting their motorbikes, quad bikes onto the site, but could still be passed by horses and cyclists. And so, you know, we'll work imaginatively to find ways to prevent that. And one of the groups that we're listening to is Hampshire County Council themselves. They run a lot of sites like this, and they do it really successfully. They don't keep everyone out. That's kind of always going to be quite difficult to do, but they've got some great ideas that they've passed on to us about how we can design the site, how we can design the access points, and how we can make sure that we minimize as far as we possibly can people's opportunity to get on there and misbehave on their motorbikes.
Yeah, and you've touched upon a question that Adam has raised, and Jamie, perhaps you want to pick up this one. What have you learned from other organisations that have conducted similar projects to minimise the problems and maximise the possible benefits? I know you mentioned in the video looking at other sites, reservoir sites, how they're run, and also Simon's mentioned talking to Hampshire County Council on how they run their sites as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had lots of stakeholder sessions with other sites that are very similar, that run these kind of reservoirs and have amenities attached to them as well. So we're trying to learn as much as we can from these areas and incorporate it where possible.
Okay, and then another question for you from Rob. Disabled access, what facilities for disabled people in mobility scooters will be available, both in terms of getting around the site and I guess at the visitor centre as well?
Yeah, great question. In terms of the design, the scheme itself, it's trying to be as inclusive as possible for all abilities. So around the visitor centre itself, it's going to be accessible for all users. Then we've got paths leading from this area that lead around the crest, and these are all at the same grade, so it's going to be fully accessible for these kind of users as well, yes.
Okay, thank you to Jamie and Simon for covering off leisure in terms of the Reservoir Project. We're going to focus on the access route options very shortly, and we've also got the routes of the new pipeline that's needed to be installed to get water from Bedhampton Springs up to the reservoir and then back again. There's been a lot of talk on our Facebook page, so if you go onto Facebook, the actual name is @Havant Reservoir, or if you search Portsmouth Water Reservoir, it will bring it up. You can see all the comments there. But here's a bit more detail on the options that we're proposing from our expert, Andy Hills.
Hello, my name's Andy Hills. I'm the Senior Engineer on the Reservoir Project, who's been leading work on the options for the access route to and from the site. We need to create a public road for vehicles to get in and out of the reservoir site. That's both whilst the reservoir is being built and when it opens to the public. Options for the access road were last looked at back in 2006 to 2008. Since then, the local area has changed, so we think it's important to look at all the options again. There's more development to the southwest of the site, and there's planning permission for a residential and mixed-use development just to the north of the site. These and other plans for development mean there are new challenges and opportunities to consider. We've carried out another review of all the options and we'll continue to review and develop new ones. Each option was assessed in terms of impact on the environment, engineering and construction, and how it fits into the overall aims of the project. Our review has shown that there are now 2 potential access points to the reservoir, from the north and from the south. A number of routes from the north were considered during the public consultation in 2008. The preferred one came from the A3M Junction 2 via the B2149. At this time, this was supported by most people because it was close to A3M and avoided residential areas in Warren Park and Rowlands Castle. From the B2149, 200 metres new access track would be needed through woodland, and then the road would continue on an existing Forestry England track in Havant Thicket to reach the reservoir. There were and still are concerns about the impact of more traffic on the B2149. As we've studied the reservoir in more detail over the past few months, we've been able to make changes to the design of the embankment, and this has created more space on the southwest side of the site. This has enabled a southern option to be developed. We can now build the embankment, a southern access route, and a separate path for walkers, cyclists, and others. This means we can create an access point from the south, either instead of or in addition to a northern one. This access point would come off Swanmore Road and follow a new road on the site along the west side of the reservoir and up to the car park and visitor centre. We're considering what routes may be available for construction, vehicles and visitors to reach this access point, whilst creating as little impact on the local roads as possible. We're continuing to develop and assess these two access options and are having ongoing conversation with landowners on the routes and the Highway Authority to see what is possible. We think this is an important time to hear your views and those of local councillors, environmental groups and other interested organisations. So please let us know what you think. We could even consider developing two access points, one from the north and the south.
So that the lowdown on the access route options for the reservoir scheme from our expert Andy Hills, who joins us now, along with Joe Farrer, who's in charge of all the information being pulled together for the planning application that will go into the councils in a few months' time. Andy, if I can start with you, had a question in from Rob, who asked, will the existing entrance to the thicket be closed permanently when the new access road is built?
I assume that you're talking about the access to the Forestry England one, and that's been touched upon already this evening. That will be remaining open and access to the car park will be retained.
Now, via the Havant Thicket Reservoir consultation website, via the Facebook page, the access route options have attracted a lot of interest, a lot of discussion going on, a lot of comments coming in. A few people have put forward their own suggestions, some in relatively light detail, some in more detail. Can you just talk a little bit about the options that you've looked at already and the level of detail you've gone to get to these two options for north and south?
Yes, certainly. As mentioned in the video, we have looked at a number of options. We looked at a total 11 options overall, including routes to the north, from the east and from the south. These went through a kind of evaluation process where we looked at the environmental impact of the various options and they were scored and rated. We looked at the engineering and safety aspects and they were scored and rated together with the project drivers as well. And that produced the shortlist of the southern option mentioned in the video and the northern option as well. We've also received information on potential other sites or means of access, onto the site, and these will be evaluated as well as possible alternatives and contributors.
Okay, and Joe, in terms of the planning application and that going in a few months' time, all the feedback we get from the consultation, any suggestions we can look at, that all helps shape the content of the application that goes in. All the information gets published in all its detail. People can look at it, and obviously it's up to the councillors on the committee to look at all that evidence and make a decision on whether to grant planning permission for the various different aspects of the scheme.
Absolutely, and it will be quite a big planning application pack, and we'll have the environmental statement and all the surveys that inform that document. We'll have the transport assessment and the traffic surveys that inform that, and all the optioneering that Andy was talking about, and how we came up with the preferred option. People can actually see a bit of detail on the website in our brochure that we've included, and there's also a traffic infographic on the website which identifies what we anticipate in terms of numbers of vehicles, and really in terms of visitor traffic, we're looking at about at the peak time, which would be late morning, so not at the same time as commuter traffic, we'd be looking about 30 30 cars arriving at the site, and that's based on the level of facilities that we're providing, that we would be providing. So again, if you have two options, that dilutes that quite significantly. The same with the construction traffic. So all these things we'll be looking at very closely, and we'll be assessing those impacts, but people will have another opportunity to comment on that once the application goes in and once they've seen all the documents, all the assessment work, and they can really see what the impacts will be on the environment and what the benefits will be as well.
Okay, thanks to Joe and Andy. And again, they're here to answer your questions in the time that we've got remaining. Let's move into the final section of the webinar, and let's talk about how we're going to get water into the reservoir and then back out again in the first place. And Bill Irvine, our lead design engineer, is back to discuss that.
Hello, my name's Bill Irvine. I'm lead design engineer on the Havant Thicket project. My role on the project is to coordinate all of the design elements across the project, including the reservoir itself, the pipeline, the pumping station, and downstream treatment works and connections into the network, providing water across the Southern Waters region. We need to lay a pipeline to fill the reservoir in the winter from Bedhampton Springs and to take water out to supply it to you when it's needed. The same pipeline could also be used to steadily draw off water into the Hermitage stream in the unlikely event we need to empty the reservoir. During the 2008 consultation, we heard support for a pipeline route that followed the Riders Lane and Hermitage Stream corridors. Since then, we've had a look in more detail at how we could lay the pipe along this route and the disruption it might cause. We've also considered new ways of laying pipe. We've looked at the engineering and how difficult it would be to build, disruption to the local community and traffic, the health, safety and well-being of the people building the pipeline and maintaining it in the future, environmental effects and sustainability, and the overall cost. As a result of this, we've slightly updated the pipeline route, which you can see in outline on this map. This route minimises the impact on communities, environmentally sensitive areas, and areas of open space with trees and grass. These would be restored after the pipe is in place. Most of the pipe will be installed using an open cut method, where we dig down from the road or land, lay the pipe, and then fill in the ground above it. In some places, we would tunnel underground using a pipe jacking method to push the pipe into place underground from one open cut hole, for example, under the railway line. Where we cross the Riders Lane and Hermitage streams, we can also take the opportunity to improve these watercourses. We plan the work so it can be carried out as quickly as possible and cause as little disruption to as few people as possible. Our proposals for the pipeline will be submitted as part of the wider planning application for the reservoir to Havant Borough Council and East Hampshire District Council later this year. The pipeline section will be an outline proposal and, if it's supported, we'll submit a detailed planning application with more information on construction and traffic management later on. For the detailed plans, we'll be looking at how we can limit the size of the areas we're working in to reduce disruption to footpaths, residents and local roads, stagger site activities to reduce traffic, restrict when work can be carried out, for example, not working overnight, and consider noise insulation measures. We'll speak to you again about these detailed plans to hear what you think.
So information there on the proposed route for the new pipeline to take water from Bedhampton Springs up to the new reservoir and then take it back out again to put it into supply. And if you're thinking, well, hold on a minute, I couldn't see that much detail on the map. The good news is if you go to our website, portsmouthwater.co.uk/Havant-Thicket-Reservoir, you can zoom right in to almost property level on the map that we've got on the website where the route is marked, and so you can see things in detail, where it goes perhaps in relation to your property or the property of friends and family and colleagues, and then you can put your comments in a digital pin in that map, and tell us where you've got queries, got concerns, or where you've got information you think it might be useful for us to know about. Bill Irvine, you heard from in the video, the lead design engineer, is back with us. And Bill, we've had a question in from Chris, who's a bit concerned about the route in terms of its impact on locals in terms of disruption. So that's something you've looked at as part of your assessment to try and keep that as little as possible for people.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks for your question there, Chris. So yeah, I mean, getting a pipe in from Bedhampton Springs up to the reservoir, it's going to be quite a large pipe. And yeah, there will be disruption caused, unfortunately, while we're digging the trench and laying that pipe. What we've looked at in terms of the options, though, are the route and where we can locate the pipe along that. So alternative, different roads, different corridors that we can follow. We are constrained, so in the so it's operating sort of two ways. So it's providing a means of conveying water from the springs up to the reservoir to fill it. And then it's also providing a flow back down to the pumping station when we need the water under gravity. And actually that condition, the gravity condition, means that we do have to sort of follow, you know, the sort of natural lie of the land, and actually, you know, the river corridors, the stream corridors, sorry, actually provide that that sort of natural lie of the land for us. So I think what we've been looking at in terms of the impact of laying the pipe is making the most of those corridors. So there's green spaces, quite large areas in many places. There are a few pinch points we've got to think quite carefully about. But actually that takes the pipeline off the roads for us. There still are quite a few you know, roads and sort of community elements that we do need to consider quite carefully. And we'll be looking at the timing and working with local residents and the community so that we can manage that effectively. And I think a key point is getting the discussion and the communication there. So we'll be listening closely, we'll be talking to all the residents and the communities so that we can try and make sure that we're you know, accommodating as many of their concerns as possible.
And I guess it's the same as the main reservoir site. There will be a clear, publicly available construction management plan so people understand what's going to happen when, what steps we're taking to minimize things like noise or disturbance. So again, that's something that people can input into and they can hold us to account as necessary too.
Yeah, clear plans, all communicated, but liaison, you know, point liaison as well. So, you know, the plans will be drawn up, but, you know, made available so you can come and have a look, but someone there to talk to and engage with and share concerns as well.
Okay, we had a quick question in from Rob about the size of the pipe in terms of its diameter, how much it is across. We saw a photo in the video of a pipe that looked relatively big. How does that compare to what the pipe that will be going in the ground in the next few years will be?
Yeah, great question there, Rob. So actually, as well as filling and emptying the reservoir, it's also providing a function between the reservoir and the Hermitage stream of enabling us to drain down the reservoir in the very unlikely event that you know, we might have to in an emergency. So actually that length between the Hermitage stream and the reservoir is about 1.2 meters diameter. So that's about sort of 1.5 kilometers of that size of pipe. And then from that point on the Hermitage stream down to the Bedhampton pumping station, down to the springs, is 700 millimeters, 70 centimeters diameter.
So relatively large pipe. So you know, yeah, much bigger than you would see for perhaps a water main or a gas main or something that people might have seen when they've had roadworks in their road.
Yeah, typically your sort of normal distribution gas pipes, water pipes might be, you know, 10 centimeters, 20 centimeters, maybe 30. Yeah, they're sort of double the size, 3 times, 4 times the size. So yeah, large pipe work.
Okay, so I would encourage people to go to the website portsmouthwater.co.uk /Havant Thicket Reservoir. go to the Getting Water to and from the Reservoir page. You've got that map. It's just like a Google map. You can zoom in right down to property level, and you can stick a virtual pin in that map and make your comments, your queries, your concerns, your local information available to us. The more the better, and that will help shape the finalised plan for putting the pipeline in a few years' time. So that's about it from us. We've just got a couple more things to get through, first of which is another poll, just to find out how you found the webinar, and also as well how you feel about the project. So let's launch that and get you voting out there. So did you find the webinar useful? In general, the feedback has been very positive on these sessions, so hopefully you found it helpful as well. And also as well, we just want to gauge your support for the project once you've heard all the detailed information. And a reminder, when you leave the webinar, you will be directed automatically to our online feedback survey. So if you feel ready to fill that out, do so right now whilst it's fresh in your mind, or you can go back to the website in due course, have a bit more of a consider and get your views in. The consultation running until the start of next week, the 8th of June. So we've got people voting away, plenty of answers coming in, and I'll let you have sight of those in just a sec. Just a reminder, you can interact with us, as Simon said, via the website. You've got a place where you can leave questions, make comments, leave your ideas. You can also as well get in touch with us via Facebook. You can see the address there on the screen. Plus, we've got the more traditional ways of getting in touch via email. And if you're quick, write to us or phone us, and we can get you a consultation brochure, a hard copy, posted out to you with a feedback form as well. So let's end the polling and share the results with you. And the good news is that everybody has found the webinar useful. So that's great. That's consistent with the results that we've had before. But if you've got any feedback on how we can improve things further, do let us know. And in terms of your support for the project, so most people are saying yes, they are supportive. There's one person who is not, but we want to hear from all sides of the equation, so do make sure to give us your views and tell us about your concerns. And there's a couple of people who aren't sure. So again, go to the website, perhaps give us some questions to answer and see how you feel after that. So let's stop sharing the results. And panel members, if you could just open up your cameras and your microphones once again. And before we head off, we're going to end with that film, by the way. If you came in a little bit late to the webinar and only saw half of the film that we showed at the start, giving you a glimpse of what the reservoir will look like in 10 years' time once it's completed, do stay tuned and join in for that. Before we go, though, Bob Taylor, Chief Exec of Portsmouth Water, is back with us. Bob, did you just want to make any closing remarks before we close the webinar?
Great, thanks, Joe. Well, obviously, thanks to everybody for tuning in and taking time out this evening to learn a bit more about the project. I'm really pleased that everybody seems to have found the session useful. So thanks to all of you for watching, and I hope you'll continue to watch the development of the project with interest. Thanks also to the panelists for doing all their stuff once again and taking up some of their evenings. And thank you all once again. Over to you, Joe.
Okay, and again, just a reminder, we have recorded this webinar, so if you think it's useful for friends or family or colleagues to have a look at it, it will be on our website along with the recordings of all the other sessions. Finally, before we go, Simon, just again, signpost people the next steps in this process. This is the last of the webinars that we're doing. The consultation is running for a few more days. Once we've got all the feedback in, what happens next after that?
Yeah, so the consultation closes on the 8th of June. So get your voices heard, get your messages in, tell us what you think. We then assess all of the ideas that you've given us, and we summarise all of that in what we're calling the "You Said We Did" report, and that will show where, if you've had an idea that we've been able to adopt, we'll be able to show you where we've done that, and if we haven't been able to adopt it, we'll be able to explain why not. And then that forms part of our planning application that goes to Hampshire Borough Council and East Hampshire District Council at the end of August, beginning of September, and then that will form our planning application for this project.
Okay, and then it's up to the Council's Planning Committee to make a decision based on the evidence and the comments that they get in about it. We look forward to that taking place. In the meantime, thank you for your time this evening on a Thursday night joining us for this webinar. I hope you found it useful. Do complete our online feedback survey. We're going to leave you to enjoy the rest of your evening with our glimpse of what Havant Thicket Reservoir would look like once completed.